Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Moveset Breakdowns. So today, a bit of a fun one, as you can see by the interesting combination. We're going to be going over Victor Saltzpyre, the Witch Hunter of Vermintide and Vermintide 2. So, the reason I wanted to go over Victor is because I've wanted to do something with the rapier, and there aren't a ton of characters that wield rapiers, unfortunately. There are a couple, sure, but Saltzpyre is kind of unique in that he specifically is using a rapier, and in fact I really like the models that they give him in game, and he uses it in an interesting way, and he's also got a fun little added bonus to it, as you can see. So let's talk a little bit about what his general movements are going to be, and we'll go from there. So firstly, important background for Victor. He is a witch hunter, which means that he kind of fights basically everything, from man to beast, chaos, Skaven, all that fun stuff. Now in Vermintide, it is noted that he specifically specializes in Skaven. He's fought them on their turf, he's fought them on humans' turf, and he seems to be perfectly competent at both. I don't personally think that him predominantly fighting Skaven has at all altered his fighting style, as he seems to not necessarily change very much in relation to fighting the Chaos Warriors of Nurgle in Vermintide 2. So, and overall, his movements don't tend to indicate the idea of fighting a smaller opponent, though his default weapon is certainly not a terrible choice. Skaven are, of course, known for ganging up on people as much as they can. They're not particularly tall, only about maybe yay tall or so, and as such, having a nice long weapon is an excellent way to keep distance. This is actually a decent crowd control weapon if people are coming up against you. And overall, of course, carrying multiple pistols is never a bad thing. But either way, apart from his background, which we can assume he is classically trained, he is also quite experienced even before the game takes place. So he's got quite a lot to work with. Now, his general positioning when he uses the weapon combo of rapier and then brace of pistols basically means that he will always have one pistol in his left hand. And that's why I brought this today, is because it's important to kind of keep an eye on how his body position changes, since he is carrying this weight. This is obviously not a flintlock like he's using. This is a percussion cap, but it is a muzzle loader, and it's about 2-3 pounds, I'd say. And decently long. His are probably a little bit longer than this, but it's not insignificant. So his general stance is a relatively simple one. He tends to alternate between left or right foot forward. His rapier is going to be held relatively low by his side. His pistol is always going to be kept up. It's some wonderful trigger safety, just in case anything goes wrong. But there's also another point to this, which I'll get back to in a moment. Now in first person, of course, his sword is, hovering here because your camera is in your neck. But in all of his third-person animations, the sword is held low. So that's what I'm going to assume his actual stance is. But either way, his sword's held down, and he has, relatively open movement, as do all of the characters, since for the most part they're running in and out of buildings, down alleyways, etc. So mobility is key. Now, his stance is quite upright, even when he is engaging into fights. He will, for the most part, when he ends up in a brawl, he'll be right foot forward, and his sword will again remain relatively low in what I would describe as a low terza. From here, when he executes his attacks, he will either do a light or a heavy. So when he does his heavy attacks, it's going to be a thrust. When he does his lights, it's going to be a cut. So let's talk about the thrusts first. So for his thrusts, he's actually a bit of an oddball. So in regards to using a rapier, if you are right-handed, right, so we'll just assume right-handed, then the guards work as such: prima, secunda, terza, quarta. Quarta being the one where my nails are up. That is the most natural one for me to execute as a right-handed person, because that turns my arm over to the inside and lines up with my core. However, Victor's different. Even though he is right-handed when it comes to using the rapier, his initial thrust is going to be in secunda, so his nails are down. Now, I don't know if there's any specific reason for this. In fact, he never thrusts in quarta, as we'll get to in a moment, but it is rather interesting that he does. Personally, I think the reason is that when he thrusts in secunda, he's still quite open. He's also guarding himself quite well against any sort of attack coming at him. and then he can also bring the pistol across very easily. Versus here, yes I can, but if I'm having to thrust into porta, they're on the inside. The pistol is now kind of a little bit jammed up, if you will. Here, I'm opening the body. It's very easy for me to employ this or not. Now, his initial heavy thrust is going to be he will pull back, he'll charge it slightly, and then he will execute a small lunge. Now, he's not going to do a full lunge down to here. Instead, it's going to be just one shoe length forward or so as he executes his initial thrust. From there, he'll recover, and his next thrust will be from above in prima, which again would look like so. So we've just done our first one, pull back, thrust from above. His final thrust, probably my favorite thrust, is going to be in terza, pretty much straight down the line. And all of these are, like I said, executed with just a small advance of the front foot. Now, I am using Italian terminology for these because that's what I'm trained in regards to rapier. However, the upright posture may cause you to be reminded of destreza, which, in case you don't know, is the Spanish tradition of rapier. They don't take a pronounced guard. They instead remain upright and much more of a walking type of gait. I would say that Victor is using a bit more of their philosophy in his movement. However, that's not to say that, Italians would fight just in their dogged positions. Need be, you're going to move where you're going to move. Anyone who fights with the sword is going to do that. But as far as aesthetic, definitely, he has a little bit of that more upright destreza look to him, as well as his footwork being not full lunges, but small. The Italian term for this would be an accrescere, the advancement of the lead foot instead of a lunge. But either way, his three thrusts are executed like so. I'll show from the side, then from the front. So he's here, boom, boom, boom. No problem. Then from the front, 1, 2, 3. And then we're just back to guard. Now, the next bit will of course be his cuts, right? Now, when it comes to his cuts, he tends to only use 2 of them. I believe he does cut from below every once in a while, but for the most part, it's going to be just cuts coming from above. Now, he has 2 of them. He'll cut from his right. This would be called a mendrito fendenti, a cut coming from above from your dominant side, followed by a reverso fendenti, cut coming from above on your offside. Then sometimes he will execute a sottomano, which is a cut from below. Now, when it comes to his cuts, he's not using a ton of arm movement. In fact, for the most part, his cuts are going to be relatively small, little wrist cuts, usually then followed with a moulinet, which would be the turning of the wrist over to come back to guard. Now, a lot of people, of course, when they see the rapier or they use it in fantasy or choreography, they either cut with it too much and basically negate the whole, length and all of that, or they never cut with it and neither are particularly good. Victor's choreography does the opposite. It uses them both pretty well, right? His thrusts are well structured and very strong, as well as being his heavies, which I do like. And then his cuts are quite extended, and he's using the small rotation of his wrist to execute his cuts, as opposed to trying to use bigger muscles. Now, while absolutely you do lose out on a little bit of power, the important thing to remember is that the reason rapiers don't cut that much is because of the length of the blade and the relatively small rotation. So in comparison to most one-handed swords, they feel very slow. They're certainly still powerful, and with a little bit of practice, you can make it feel pretty good. But if I just try to cut with it, it's a lot of blade, already extended, it's moving pretty slow, in comparison at least. But when he executes his cuts, he's going to use, again, same upright posture, but he'll just advance the lead foot and tends to do a nice 1-2 sort of combo. I believe it's 2 lights will kill an enemy most times for him. And then occasionally he will throw in that sotani, which should just be a rising cut from below. Now this one isn't going to be a wrist cut because we have to turn the arm over, and then we're going to extend upwards. So that would be boom, like that. But for the most part, it's going to be just boom, 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 boom. He cuts at nice 45-degree angles, and just every time the cut finishes, he just turns the wrist over and he's got that powered again. So overall, a little combo with Victor might look like this. Moving around, thrust, cut, cut. We're back in the guard. Now, of course, elephant in the room, the gun, right? And there goes demonetized. But anyway, when it comes to his pistol, he does keep it back, and I said I would kind of explain why I think he does. Part of it is just general firing position. Earlier manuals on firing do describe the idea of going to here and then lining up the body before shooting. Obviously, he's not aiming per se, and in fact, Victor doesn't really aim with his brace of pistols. He's pulling it, firing it at relatively close range, ditching it and pulling another one because they're all single shot. However, by keeping this pistol upright, one, he is helping elongate his body. So this is helping keep his posture up because he's up, his core is active. This is actually quite good posture to fight from. Ordinarily, you may also see people using their hand, or in classical fencing, will even be up like this. Helps open things up and keep your balance. Now, that may also be another reason he chooses not to lunge, as if you were to lunge, it's not that you have to cast your hand back to balance you, but that is a weight that I have to kind of balance, and it's weird, right? But another reason he may be keeping it more upright as opposed to carrying it downward is because in case anything tries to get hold of this, it's back and away. He can very easily move his sword between you and that pistol. It's also easy for him to employ or to just keep back. Really, unless someone comes up directly behind him, there's not a worry of someone taking this off of him. But when it comes to his firing, relatively simple. As you're using your sword at any point, you can click middle mouse, he'll fire, discard, pull a new one. And the only other time that the pistol really comes up is in his parries. So every character has a blocking stance, right? Some will put their shield in front of them. Some others will turn their sword over into a bogan-like position. Victor, on the other hand, snaps his blade to center. Now, he does not stand in terza, where as you can see the blade is straight up, straight down. He actually stands kind of between terza and quarta, which is good because what he's doing is he's essentially using the maximum mechanics of his arm to put pressure to the inside here. So his parrying position is to hold the center line, and if anyone cuts, usually from their dominant side, he's got a ton of force there to deal with it. Now, rather than catching it and then attacking along the line, when an attack does come in, we'll actually see almost like this. He's doing what's called a tutta caperta parry, which if you saw the breakdown on Edward Kenway, you would know is when you cross the weapons together. Now sometimes the weapons actually look crossed, sometimes they look a little separate, but either way, all he's doing here is just doubling his chances of protecting himself. If anything goes around the sword, the pistol will catch it. Now, in regards to pistols being used as an offhand parrying weapon, we do have historical examples of this. Now, you're not generally going to be using them in that manner, unless you're firing really quickly and it just happens to still be in your hand. Of course, you can hit with it. You can even turn it over and use it as a club or things along those lines. It's actually decently weighted for that. But something we do have, and I will put a link to it in the description because it's a PDF that's available, is advice from a sailor in the British Navy who recommended that you keep your pistol in your left hand, fire it, and then you're going to reverse it in your hand like so. So now it's held in a reverse grip down the length of my forearm, which keeps me relatively safe, and I just keep it up here. And in case any cut looks like it's going to hit me, I've got a literal shield. Victor doesn't do this in his moveset. I think it would have been really cool if he had, but the problem is from a first-person perspective, you don't really see a whole lot. I mean, you're looking at the full length of it. I'm looking at that. So not necessarily all that exciting. Not to mention, of course, he is firing and then discarding. So holding onto it as a parrying weapon just means now he's got a full hand. But like I said, he'll snap to that middle position, an attack will come in, he will cross the weapons as such to defend, and then he'll just return back to his middle position. But either way, I wanted to keep my arm up with this through the whole thing just as a challenge, and let me tell you, it starts to get heavy after a while, no lie. I would love at some point to, get a weight or something like this and try fighting for an extended period while keeping this upright, because it's quite interesting. But either way, something a little bit different, and I hope you have enjoyed my breakdown of Victor Saltzpyre's moveset. I'll probably end up doing the other characters from Vermintide at some point or another, But for now, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over some other movesets another time.